Welcome, friends, to the world of law. Human life is the be all and end all of all human endeavors. Life is all important and blood is sacred. Live and let live is the fundamental principle of human civilization, not kill and get killed. What if forces get antagonistic to the very basic concept of human life? Therein arises the question of capital punishment. How are those criminals to be dealt with? Should they be punished or should they be let off? This is the topic for our today's discussion, and for that we have invited a noted and eminent jurist of J&K State, Advocate Tasadduq Hussain. Thank you, sir, very much for being in our studio. We'll begin with this question. A little peep into the history of capital punishment, and when was the need felt?
In the context of the Indian history, the question is a very generalized question. The first murder was of Abel and Cain, is the biblical history. And then we had throughout river valley civilizations and thereafter. And then it got a important focus when different religions evolved. So I would not be making a very generalized statement about capital punishment, crimes, especially the crime of murder. I would only be expressing my views in the context of the present Indian form of laws which we are having, and how the question of capital punishment arose in India. And in that backdrop, I would be rather confining the question to the Indian subcontinent, rather than having a global or a globalized view. Otherwise, we would be landing into a realm of generalizations.
From that, it's very difficult to come
It will become
out.
very abstract. So to concretize your question, so for the Indian context is concerned, about the Indian subcontinent, I have my own insight in analyzing this problem. And my viewpoint is that when the British came as a colonial power, I'm not discussing the medieval India, the Mughal period, or the Afghan period, or prior to that of the Hindu Rajput kingdoms, which many galore were existing in India. I am only confining myself to the question of capital punishment as it arose after the British became a dominant power in India. So it all started as a matter of punishment because Syed Ahmad Brailwi started a revolt against the British in 1837. After the Battle of Plassey, the British had already gained a predominant position in Bengal, and literally the Mughal king had become a titular head. His writ did not run. There was rise of the Sikh and the Maratha powers. And then the British, in order to get sovereignty from the Mughals, they found, in fact, that there was a Muslim revolt in India, which now historians are so eager to describe as the first war of independence. In fact, it was a Muslim rebellion against the British rule, which started in 1837 from Operation Balakot. And later on in 1803, when the British had already taken possession of the Delhi and thereafter, the rebellion spread to the court of the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, who rather was expecting a help from Iran. And that is why the Muslims just plunged into this rebellion. The rebellion was crushed in a matter of months. And by 1858, the British had established their supremacy in Delhi. And once the mutiny of 1857 was crushed, as a matter of punishment, summary trials were held and 50,000 Muslims were hanged. So British introduced this capital punishment as a punishment for rebellion against then the predominant class of Muslims. This is how now the British historians have started doing this viewing, taking a fresh view at this problem from this angle and from this perspective. 50,000 or more people belonging to one particular religious persuasion were hanged. That was the punishment. And that also, we had the famous trial of 12 sons of Bahadur Shah Zafar, who were hanged at the old Darwaza at Delhi. And then, after the British established their supremacy and British Crown took over the reins of power directly, so that we had a string of viceroys after 1857. Then the British extended this concept of capital punishment further in quelling thuggery. Sir Williams Bentinck was the first Viceroy of India, who in fact put a complete cessation to the practice of thuggery by utilizing capital punishment as an instrument of terror. So in India, capital punishment came as an instrument of terror. It started not with the crime of a person against a person. That was during the Mughal rule.
So
that is how, during the entire British period, colonial rule, capital punishment for murder was mandatory. It is only when the Indian Constitution was adopted that the leaders of the democratic India realized that they would be branded still as inheritors of a colonial past, that they then found that some reforms in the criminal law are imperative. And that is why Criminal Procedure Code was amended. And then it was laid down that the normal punishment for murder would be life imprisonment. And in rarest of rare case, the capital punishment will be imposed. So it is only in this historical perspective we have to view the penal law of India, especially the law of murder. So when we say whether capital punishment should be abolished or not,
we'll have to look so deep into the historical perspective. We will have to look
to the socio-political, religious and other considerations.
Sir, that's so nice that you found the seeds of capital punishment in that long colonial history of British. So this is a question for the inheritors of that British legacy. Now we come down to the nitty-gritty of capital punishment. The question that is in front of all legal experts and lawgivers and lawmakers, that should the very capital punishment be abolished or not. So the question is that, is it a deterrent for a criminal that if he fears that if he kills someone he will be killed in return? Will it really get down the rate of crime in a society if it's upheld?
This is in fact a debate which we call the utilitarian viewpoint about the criminal justice system in the West, because after the industrialization of the Western, I'm talking of the Western world, which we say the modern era, the commencement of the modern era, the old order, feudal order, transformed into, and we had an industrial society. And in an industrial society, the ruthlessness which is associated with the industrial society led to a breakdown of law and order. And a school of thought represented by William Scaliger and other political thinkers arose, which laid emphasis on the utilitarian principle. And they probably thought that if a person kills and in return is killed, two values would be enhanced. It would be the enhancement of the two very significant values. One, that human life itself is precious. The criminal should learn that human life itself is precious. And secondly, the deterrent value, that it would make the society safe because people would be deterred. But this is all relative. As I said, and as I reiterate, it is socio-religious, political, historical context which determines these questions. Their statistics are always misleading.
So will it increase the crime rate if it's altogether abolished? There are different views, and proponents and opponents of the same argument have some valid and some substantive facts to support their arguments. What do you say about it?
This should be correlated with the type of the society which you are dealing with. That is why I said the question in England and United States would be different from the question in Iraq and Afghanistan, or Chechnya, or Kashmir, or Northeast India. The considerations are altogether different. The circumstances are altogether different. It is a very, but if a generalized view is not taken, then I would rather concretize the law with regard to capital punishment, so far India is concerned. The Indians rather like copycats, if I may say, a copycat way of aping the West.
Simply aping.
Aping the West. The Indian founding fathers had a society which was hierarchical. They had a society which was not only hierarchical, it was caste-ridden. They had a society which was not only caste-ridden, which was based on economic inequalities.
So many scourges plaguing.
As Justice Krishna Iyer has rightly delineated in many of his lectures, in such a hierarchical and feudal society, the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution simply borrowed some notions from the West. Because India wanted to transform itself from the feudal, caste-ridden and economically depressed society where more than 30 crores of people live below poverty line. I will give you a brief conspectus of this struggle. It started with A.K. Gopalan's case in 1950, and then the Supreme Court of India ruled that law means state enacted law. Thereafter, 26 years passed by, and in 1976 in ADM Jabalpor's case, the same principle was reiterated by the Supreme Court, with Justice Khanna dissenting, that law enacted by the state alone is sufficient because Article 21 of the Constitution says nobody shall be deprived of his life or liberty except according to procedural established by law. So procedure established by law, according to the Supreme Court, meant that it should be a procedure enacted by the legislature, whether it is rational, arbitrary, whatever it is, the supreme power of the parliament to enact a procedure was accepted. Then there was a change in 1978 when Manika Gandhi's passport was seized. And the first time the Supreme Court of India felt that it was rather being pushed away from the modern civilized notions about capital punishment. And Justice Bhagwati for the first time propounded a theory that doctrine of equality and reasonableness as contained in Article 14 and 19 should also be read into Article 21. And it was Justice Chandra Achut of the Supreme Court of India who said the procedure should be fair. Thereafter, Justice Krishna Iyer in Sunil Batra's case in 1978 further extended the horizons by bringing reasonableness into picture, and he rather expounded and expatiated his views in Jolly Varghese case, which was decided in 1980 whether you can send a man to jail if he is unable to pay his debts. And Justice Krishna Iyer said it would be a very savage law if a person can be sent to jail because he cannot pay his debts, and yet Civil Procedure Code had a provision. If you don't pay the debts, then one of the ways of executing your decree is by sending you to jail. We again had this evolutionary process continuing among the elitist judges of India. And then in 1980, Bachan Singh's case was decided, and Justice Sarkaria, who spoke for the majority, said the procedure should be fair and just procedure. For 2 years, Justice P.N. Bhagwati of the Supreme Court of India remained silent and gave his dissenting opinion, which is rather one of the most remarkable opinions given by any Supreme Court judge on the question of capital punishment. And he said in 1982, his dissent was published. And in 1982, he gave his judgment that the law should not only, the substantive law should not only be reasonable, it should also not be arbitrary. Then in 1983, there was a complete shift in the thinking of the Supreme Court of India. So not only procedural fairness, but also substantive law like Penal Code of India was also immediately struck down.
So there is a very incisive analysis on the whole legal history of India and Indian subcontinent. Now, there is a conundrum that is constantly disturbing a common man when he tends to think about capital punishment. That if a criminal is punished, but if the evidences are framed against him and after the case is settled, there are certain things that erupt, that surface after the settlement of the case, individual stands punished, who will punish the state?
This is a very basic question which rather engaged the attention of the United States Supreme Court in Georgia versus Fruman. The same question. The question is that the courts are not infallible.
That's the basic question.
Basic
like
question.
Human beings, they are also fallible.
Fallible. If courts are not infallible, that is the whole doctrine of commutation of sentence, then central government can also analyze the evidence afresh and comes to its, although it cannot wipe out a judicial decision, but it can reprieve or commute the sentence. So central government has to take a view of the entire evidence and come to a conclusion whether just this capital sentence is justified or not. But again, the central government, being composed of men, is also fallible. And that is why this very principle, which was debated before the United States of Supreme Court, they said that such a wide discretion which you have given either to the court or to the state is violative of the due process of law. So the concept of due process of law assumed importance. And that importance Indian law has not attached to the due process of punishment.
Sir, a brief response that I need from you, that since you refer to religion and religious perspectives, there are people who get the argument authenticated from the religion by the biblical story of Cain killing Abel and getting stigmatized for good. There is a mark of culpability on Cain that cannot be washed out even after millions of years. That on one side. And on the other side, when we say that one who kills a man, by man himself his blood will be shed. So there are both the opinions that are somehow to be ferreted out from the same religious documents. A brief response from you, sir.
It is, as I said, two types of. One, crime against the state. Suppose a rebel wants to overthrow the state. For the state he is a rebel, for the people who are supporting him he is a martyr.
Okay.
So it is all relative. If you look from the angle of the state, it is a crime against the state, it is murder punishable with death.
No.
If you look at and view it from the angle of the people who are in rebellion, he is a martyr, a hero. There can be no concrete, cut and dried, definite answer.
Definite answer. So
No.
earlier in your discussions, you referred to some examples where in the rarest of rare cases capital punishment will be referred to. My question is that granted that if in some of the rarest of rare cases there is no chance but to kill the criminal, what kind of death? There are different means. Somebody is asphyxiated, suffocated, gassed, or electrocuted, or hanged, or lethal injection is being. So what is the most benign form of killing, even if the criminal is to
This
be?
is also a relative question. In Christian world, garroting,
Garroting,
which you
yes.
say hanging, garroting, has been outlawed by the 7 judges of the Supreme Court of United States. It has been outlawed by the House of Lords in UK itself, in Europe itself. It becomes a Western concept where gassing or a lethal dose of a cyanide or some other poison is considered more benign way of killing a man, so that torture is not involved. So for the Asian, it is also to be viewed from the Western and Asian viewpoint. So from the Asian viewpoint, when you take the country which claimed to be most democratic and most civilized and which blew its own trumpets on this score was India. India is retaining hanging. You have hanging in Iraq, you have hanging in other West Asian countries. India asking itself as an inheritor of a great civilization and of being a democratic country. The irony is that it is India which has adopted garroting, and even the Supreme Court of India has lent its approval, and even the Jammu and Kashmir High Court, to this type of capital punishment. So it is again a relative question.
Ultimately, man is to be killed. So whichever way to be adopted, that does
different
not matter.
countries, because of their, as I said, socio-political, cultural, religious, and other considerations, have the West has completely adopted gassing or lethal injection or electrocution as a mode of putting a man to death, whereas Asian countries are still clinging to garroting or hanging, and in some countries which are of communist orientation, there we still have killing by you shoot a person.
Yes. So whatever the means by which we get a human being killed, do you think that it is a relic of barbarism? As there are many fierce opponents against the capital punishment who believe that it's a relic of barbarism and it should be...
No, that is, you go to you are in fact, now we are going into a definitely into a different alien topic, and that is whether capital punishment should be abolished or not. I would think which would be a part of
Is it still
our
savage
further
to treat?
debate.
Is it still savage to deal with a human being in such a way that we somehow want to do away with him?
It is a personal poll you take, individualized personal opinion. Then you may have to hold a referendum or a plebiscite for finding out. Different people have different approaches. It is all relative. It is all relative because unless you abolish war, this is hypocrisy of the first order. In war you kill thousands. While you are waging a war, you kill thousands. And while your state is going to punish an individual, you say it is barbaric.
But sir, in war, law is the first casualty. There are no rules to be upheld.
And all capital punishment is nothing but an instrument of war, mini-war. War of the state against the individual who rebels against his laws. Otherwise, without a law, or you can't have a crime, and without a crime, you can't have punishment. These are all state-made.
Sir, it was very wonderful to have your views about the capital punishment, and many more questions are to be answered, and that will be in the second part of our discussion. So as of now, we will take your leave. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
So the question is relative, that should capital punishment be abolished or not. It varies from society to society, from system to system, and what more can be said about it. There are more questions lurking in our mind, and those will be answered in the second part of our discussion. Till then, thank you very much.